Okay, so today I thought I'd take a detour. Well, perhaps it's not really a detour, but it's a slightly different take on my usual topics. And so today I would like to talk about the role of genius, the limitations of such, and compare it to really what we often mistake as genius, which is inspiration. And so the role of genius in life is actually quite interesting. We tend to call a lot of things genius when they don't deserve it. Um, Genius is transformative. Genius is something that takes a preconceived notion and completely invalidates or revolutionizes it. Genius is not the continuous application of oops, is not the continuous application of a plan, and it's certainly not the ability to come up a new with a new very similar device or a very popular thing year after year, because popularity really has no bearing on the sense of genius itself. Now, we talked about the continuous application of a plan and how that is not genius, but what that is, the ability to continuously apply a plan and to further that plan and to broaden that plan and to take that plan into new and interesting paths. That is the job of inspiration. And oftentimes in society, genius will inspire, but genius itself is not something that can or even should happen day to day, because that's too much, man. You don't want someone to be completely revolutionizing the revolution, bringing revolution to the world day after day. Permanent revolution is something that's left better for Trotsky and not for anyone else. And he got a nice pick in his head, right? So, let's not have a revolution every day. So, if genius is transformative and inspiration is additive, then why why do we use the word genius so often? Well, because it's often used in cases with people that perhaps as a population we're not familiar with or we don't understand. For example, well, a few examples come to mind. Certainly our boy at Tesla, our Jobs who art in heaven. These types of people, they are geniuses, and very rightly so. But they're called geniuses for things that perhaps isn't what was their particular genius. For example, Steve Jobs ran his first company, Apple, into the ground and left, got kicked out by the board. Um, Not genius. But his particular genius, at least, is coming back and being able to transform Apple from well, what it was into what it is today. And certainly the original call to make the iPhone itself is genius. That is a transformative event that has completely shaken up the world. I mean, if you want to talk about Pixar, maybe, but in terms of Apple, um, our boy Steve was a genius. But therein we also see the limits, especially the limitations of genius, and the genius who knows he's a genius. Because before he passed, if we look at the industrial design of what happened with the phones that were in development while he was alive and in development after he died, and his good friend Joni was still with Apple. We see a slow slide into a comfort zone that luckily our boy uh, our boy Cook has pulled the company out of. But the point there being, genius is transformative, but it is itself not necessarily the best way to continue to run a company. Well, we're using it in terms of company now, so yeah, it's not. It might not be the best way to continuously run a company simply because someone who is considered a genius and knows that he's a genius might, and I'm sure we've all seen these people in life, might not be susceptible to criticism or to change their mind if one is so convinced of one's superiority and ability and intelligence. Why would one change one's mind for because someone of lesser value has spoken? And there are limitations there, and that I think is a pitfall for all humans, and that is something that I ascribe really to the to our reactionary self, which oftentimes stands in the way of our idealistic or inspirational self that wants to push us forward. But that's a conversation for a completely different day. So genius itself is great; it's transformative, but that doesn't mean that genius can run a company properly. And if we're completely honest, a lot of geniuses, quote unquote, in business, um, have outstayed their welcome. A lot of geniuses in the political sense have, in the political world, have outstayed their welcome, and that's just a very human thing to do. You know, I feel bad saying it, but that you know, thankfully for Apple at least, um, Steve passed when he did, because otherwise, who knows what where he would have taken the company. And I personally am not confident that he would have taken it to the place or to as good a place as it is here today. Now, that doesn't really matter too much. So let's talk about a different company that is of particular interest vis-a-vis genius and its, how should we say, and its limitations. And that is my boy over at Tesla. I'm not gonna name him, but there are a few reasons why I think that genius has its limitations. Especially in the modern age, and that's uh well, it certainly teaches us that these people that we consider geniuses are inherently very, very human, no matter how pretentious they'd like to be or how interestingly they might want to name their child. And so let's talk about Tesla's acquisition of Solar City, which itself is a was a failing company that was run by the family of our founder at Tesla, and why this happened. So to me, um, this is a very inefficient use of capital, right? Like the when we talk about genius, where we claim all these outrageous claims about how powerful and how smart and how visionary people are, but at the end of the day, it really shows you that there's just dudes, they have their dude things, they have their dude girlfriends, they have their dude problems, and they very much are still just dudes, and that presents an issue. when we idolize geniuses, and the, shall we say, there is enough moral backing for these geniuses, it, power gets to people's heads. And so for Tesla, which probably could have been more profitable much earlier had it not been for the distractions of its founder and the very, very inefficient allocation of capital that was the purchase of Solar City, right? So again, that we come to this point where genius itself is transformative in the founding and in the business model that that Tesla was pursuing, which is, a super high end car that funds a high end car that then funds a mass market car that then funds a whole bunch of other things, and all of these are built on, one or two common platforms, efficiencies of scale, etc., etc. Wonderful, amazing. But the problem presents itself. Why? um, why was it that our boy got so distracted by his other ventures that that perhaps Tesla wasn't always his um his lifeblood, right? And I would actually argue that that's very important for a founder and a visionary and a genius to look after his own baby. And perhaps he thought that he could deal with all of this. Perhaps he never sleeps and has the ability to be awake, for weeks at a time without being overly crazy. And that's great, but that's obviously not the case. So when genius itself finds itself inspired and transformed and morally backed by a huge fan club and sky high valuations, then genius tends to do as genius does and go crazy. So I, I I I think, at least personally, Tesla would have benefited from a more professional management once the company itself had proven to be viable, and that's maybe 2-3 years after the original founding. And then, if our boy had taken a slightly hands-off approach and handed the reins to some professional managers while he himself controlled all of the voting and, cheerled it for whatever he wanted, I don't think I would have an iota of complaint about that. But that was not how it worked, and that itself is. Oh, I'm just reminded of something else. We work. Oh, but that's an entire wonderful, fascinating, and highly interesting tale that we'll talk about another day. Sorry, distractions. Yeah. So I'm of the opinion that Tesla would have benefited very much from hands-off professional leadership, with our boy being a chairman of the board, chief technical officer, whatever. Just leave the executions to someone else so that you can focus on what you do best, which is apparently your technical knowledge and your other games with spaceships and tunnels. And to me, that would have been a much better role model for not just the world but also aspiring entrepreneurs, because every founder wants to retain control, and unless you are one of the very, very few founders out of millions that have managed to corner a market that nobody else can ever get into, a la say, you know, something to do with the face or something to do with search. Unless you can be a founder in these cornered markets, every other founder should really hand over control and just be a cheerleader, because otherwise you're just going to run your company into the ground. Nobody it's it's much more difficult to placate a genius when the genius is not making as much money for everyone else. And in the vast majority of the time, 99.9% of the time, that's what happens. And that's where companies probably not probably that's where a lot of promising companies with promising technology just go away. And that's tragic. Absolutely tragic. But anyway, we'll move on. I have too many opinions about this. Let's talk about the role of genius in war, which I think has been one of those very interesting and perhaps niche topics that not many people will think about. But when we talk about the likes of Napoleon, Alexander the Great, you know, Caesar, I'm not going to name a whole bunch of more recent ones, but when we talk about these people, um, we tend to ascribe the victory on the battlefield to the individual, to the genius of a general who managed to move a key unit from one place to another, to the almost superhuman insight of this person in being able to create space for himself at a vital moment, insertion of proper units at vital points to blunt an attack, all of that we call genius, when really we should be calling doctrine, right? In modern military, there's no such thing as an individual fight. There hasn't been battles won by individual fights since hmm, I don't even know, when would that be, thousands of years ago, when champions still ruled the earth. Let's go back to the Three Kingdoms era of ancient China. Like, it's the role of genius is only applicable insofar as it describes the um, historical significance of the body of commanders that led up to this person making that decision. So, if I go into a little bit of detail, say the German general staff and the sheer amount of aggressive and forward leading commanders that it's generated, only with an entire history of this kind of education and value. And for Germany, this was 400 or 500 years in the making. Can we churn out really powerful commanders? Like, actually, no, never mind. I'm not going to name any of them. Can we name? Can we churn out powerful and quote unquote genius commanders like we've seen in, and like how people talk about it in World War II? So a war, especially in military, is or sorry, in especially in the military, the role of genius has been oversubscribed to the people, to the individual commander, whereas um, it should very much more be subscribed to the historical and morale that his soldiers had compared to the rest of the world, or the rest of Europe, which at that point in time might as well have been the world in terms of Western history. And so it's it's Caesar, but it's also the brilliance of the Roman legion that won him all his battles in Gaul. It's it's Frederick the Great, but it's also the way that the Prussian state was set up, with the sheer amount of able-bodied men who knew how to fight and were willing to fight, that won him the 7 Year War. Well, that and copious amounts of money from others. But we're at 20 minutes again. So, in summary, genius is transformative, but after it's transformed, it should really move out of the way and leave room for the inspired followers to actually make that dream happen and keep that dream a permanence. A